From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome back to the show. I'm Ken Davis at Chicago Newsroom. So I think by now we all know the city's history, that if you'd visited Chicago in 1885, you wouldn't have found volleyballers at the Oak Street Beach. It was railroad yards and slaughterhouses and massive warehouse complexes. And as we all know, Aaron Montgomery Ward said, "This must stop." And then he started the movement that got to become the Lakefront Forever Open, Clear and Free movement. And now we've won the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Congratulations, Chicago, by the way. All those parks activists now are back in the news whining about how the Lakefront Protection Ordinance says in no instance will further private development be permitted east of Lakeshore Drive. So we thought we'd take a look at the Lakefront Protection Ordinance just to see exactly what it does say here. Let's see. Section 11.124, exceptions. No further development, blah, 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 east of Lakeshore Drive, unless the structure is an exhibition hall that was championed and named for a press bearer. Oh, no, that's not the section. Wait, 11.124.23, exceptions for musea and curiosity emporia, such structures shall be permitted if proposed by a second-generation mayor having achieved at least 20 years in office, and if said museum is for the children. But I think we're looking for subpart 4. If said museum or curiosity emporium is created, proposed, or financed by an entertainment executive having achieved personal wealth in excess of $1 billion and whose lakefront structure houses a tasteful collection of popular cultural iconography, and who shall, in return for access to said public land, reward the people of Chicago with generous benefits to the city's political leaders in order to assist them with their incumbencies. So see, it's all there. It's right in the Lakefront Protection Ordinance, and all the goo-goos are they're just going crazy again. Two people who know about how Chicago works, editorial page people. The editor of the editorial page, who's been here many times. Welcome back, Tom McNamee. Glad to have you here. At the Did I say the Sun-Times? Didn't I say that? Oh, well, I should have said it. Anyway, also from the Tribune, Kristen McQueary is here from the Tribune editorial board. So the two distinguished editorial pages are represented for the very first time right here on Chicago Newsroom, and I'm very happy to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
So we can talk about the Lucas Museum a little bit on the show today. We can talk about memorializing something for Jane Byrne. We have things going on with the Chicago Board of Education. They're dealing with their... Anyway, but the one thing that struck me as really sort of almost breaking news is, just yesterday afternoon, is that the Supreme Court voted 9-0 to not allow the police to take your iPad, your iPhone, your smartphone, and just kind of look through it randomly without a search warrant. That is big news in the jurisprudence law, I would think.
Why does the 9-0 decision surprise you?
Because nothing happens 9-0 in this country anymore. I mean, we're so divided. Everybody's in camps, and I just would have imagined that this would have been another one of these 5-4 splits.
You're thinking maybe Alito and Thomas and Scalia would have voted pro-cop.
Well, it's interesting.
Cops get to look at your cell phones.
That would be my knee-jerk reaction, yeah, but
yeah,
not
I mean,
necessarily.
but that's why it's important, because I think what you're saying here is the fact that 9-0 tells you just how much everybody across the political spectrum understands the idea that in this new world we live in, your cell phone is not just a phone. It is your life. Yeah. And even the Thomases and the Alitos understand that to the point where they're willing to say cops can't do something. So it's the brave new world we're in.
Yeah,
technology is it's constantly the issue.
And I think they do have a civil liberties side to them, where I think even in the opinion they wrote that it's intimate information on your phone, your bank records, your pictures of your grandkids. So they saw it as kind of moving the Constitution into the 21st century, and that's what
I mean, it's almost like a Fourth Amendment issue for those guys.
Right, they said it was modernizing the Fourth Amendment.
That almost like stationing troops in your house or something.
It's not that far removed.
It's really not, and in a really weird way, the your cell phone has become your house in constitutional terms, because everything you have that's important is digitally in this thing, and searching it is no different than coming in and rifling through your bedroom and closets and stuff. So.
Yeah, well, we wrote an editorial a couple of months ago saying that would be the proper ruling. We're not a bunch of lawyers, but it's just in common sense, I think, prevailed here too.
Yeah. Okay.
So well, of course, it has implications in Chicago, because I think your newspaper reported today that there are some indications that the Chicago Police Department might already have been doing some of this.
I think the story indicated, though, that they go to a judge and get a search warrant anyway, because it's easy to do. Judges will just hand over the search warrant, but they have gone through that step to protect themselves.
And we also we have word this week that the city is installing these bizarre collectors of metadata on lampposts on Michigan Avenue and State Street and other places in the city that ostensibly collect environmental data like
particles in the air, sunlight, temperature, foot traffic.
And while they're at it, they also collect all the cell phone data of everybody who happens to be walking by.
But they're not going to do anything with it, Ken. All that information that they collect. Don't worry.
Just like all those other cameras they put up that they're not going to do anything with.
And the thing is, my reaction always in these cases is the same as yours, which is just, oh my God, Big Brother's watching me. And I think that's actually the correct first reaction. But I must say, I'm sometimes surprised to find out that the unintended consequences are not what I thought they'd be. Perfect example is, do you know how many cops have been caught being crossing the line of brutality because of cameras? Do you know how many bad guys have been caught because they walked up to an ATM and assaulted somebody, and there were 6 cameras watching them? I kept writing these, we kept running these editorials about Big Brother watching you and the fear of cameras. And I don't take any, and I don't regret any of those. That's all true. But I don't think I appreciated the extent to which this surveillance society we all live in has had the effect also of going after some pretty bad people and catching them. And it's a whole new industry now, catching people who police who go rogue and catching them on these surveillance cameras, privacy cameras. So it's funny. There is an upside here. I'm not advocating for Big Brother, but it's more complicated.
I would have to say that among the many things that I've changed my mind on over the last 10 years or so, that's probably in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah, me too.
Because when the first initiative came around to start putting cameras on the L cars and the buses and stuff, I thought it was just horrible. But then the first time you start seeing people actually, like you say, from 4 camera angles assaulting somebody.
The Boston Marathon bombers.
That's right.
Sure.
Right.
Those guys never would have been caught had it not been for those cameras up and down the street.
So. And there was a case on CTA of somebody pushing someone down the stairs, and she later died, and they got a great shot of that assailant.
And in fact, there's reportedly been a reduction of those kinds of crimes on the CTA, and one of the arguments is that people are aware of the fact they're on camera.
So we actually have changed our mindset about things, and we now have more of an acceptance of the notion that when you are out in public and you're walking along the street, you may be being viewed by 100 cameras. I mean, and it just seems kind of routine now. It's really a weird acceptance for some of us who are a little older and remember when that wasn't the case.
But we don't really accept it. Well, we still struggle with it, right? I mean, it's just a question of understanding that it's not all bad or all good. But I'm still very unsettled by all that stuff.
I mean, it occurs to me that I could leave the studio here and I could walk to, say the Hancock Center and get on the train and take the train home. And the city could probably piece together a video record of my entire journey.
You're on camera at all times. You really are.
Right. Well, anyway, so let's talk about our former mayor. Your paper, Mike Sneed, really sort of took the lead on this, Tom. This idea that she really is a kind of a forgotten mayor, and she doesn't deserve to be.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Richard M. You're talking about Jane.
The other forgotten
He's not
mayor.
forgotten.
Yeah.
No, Jane is the forgotten mayor. Rich Daley is the mayor who may not be mentioned.
Right.
I think that there's a difference.
Yeah, Mike's been on a roll lately. I really like working with her. So now the question, after all this time, she has been the forgotten mayor. And I've always kind of liked Jane Byrne, among other reasons, because you could always call her up. I mean, even if she was mayor, you could call her up. And she was always accessible. I I recently read a piece from an old piece in the Chicago Reader by Ray Hanania back from 1980 something.
Wow.
But you know what? I think it was 1989, something like that. It was a look back in his time as City Hall, as a City Hall reporter, then for the Southtown before he went to the Sun-Times.
Right.
And it was all about Jane Byrne. And and he reminded me of just how insane everything was in City Hall under Jane Byrne. I mean, we shouldn't forget. It was a chaotic time. She was an inconsistent, sort of mercurial person.
Yes, that's
and,
well
and,
put.
And it's very easy now to just remember, you know, she's this historic figure, first woman mayor. In fact, in many ways, she was not the greatest mayor. No. But she was the first woman mayor, and there's a lot to be said for that, especially in Chicago back in 1983, was it? Or when was it? 79.
79,
Back in 79. For a woman to become mayor in Chicago in 79, and I think equally amazing, she beat the Chicago Democratic machine, and no one had ever done that. And for those two achievements, of nothing else, and she did do some good things as mayor, but if for nothing else, those two reasons, she absolutely should be remembered and honored.
She is,
and it's
though.
About
she
time.
is remembered and honored. Why do we have to name a street or build a statue or something to our politicians? I don't think you deserve is a word that fits into this idea that somehow we come to revere our politicians. They're public servants. She's in the history books. We know who she was and is, and I don't think we need to. You were talking about the.
Yeah, where's the street for me and you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. 79th and Western.
Well, I mean, logically, it makes, you know what I mean? I mean,
right.
Where's the street for Ken? I mean.
Well, and you know, Maggie Daley made quite a contribution to the city of Chicago, but she gets a whole park, and she was a first lady. So
I disagree with that too. I don't think we need to.
I think you make a great point, and I've even as I'm thinking. We're going to name something for Jane Byrne, so the real conversation for me is what to name for her. But you're totally right. I mean, there is. I don't want to stop at her. I mean, if we're going to stop naming things for people, we should have stopped at the Dailies, right?
We should have stopped 20 years before that.
We should grandfather Janie in, and then the rest of them, no more naming things for politicians.
Right.
But
sort of like the Lakefront Protection Ordinance. Okay, well, that big building there will stop now.
I always use the example of the Irish. You know, all their poets are on their money instead of politicians. I think it's great.
Yeah. So we should name Chicago after its famous poets.
Yeah, pretty soon we're going to have George Lucas Way.
So, I mean, but, okay, so then is this your consensus that Jane Byrne should not get anything named after her?
I just said I think it's going to happen. And actually, I agree with Kristen to the extent that, you know, that I don't like this policy of Dan Ryan. Who's Dan Ryan?
Yeah.
Jane Byrne's not Dan Ryan. I think she rises above the usual pack because of those symbolic important things. She was the first to kill the machine, or, you know, to win against them, and she's the first woman mayor. So, you know, all things said, fine. I'm fine with that. So then the question becomes, what do you name for her? Right. And I wouldn't want to name Buckingham Fountain for her because, frankly, there's somebody named Buckingham who did it, and I believe in keeping those historic names. That's part of what makes a city. Right. They don't change that stuff, you know.
What about just a nice painting in City Hall with a plaque, which I'm sure is already there, first woman mayor?
I see a column going.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to name the Circle Interchange. I'm a little concerned about because when has anybody ever had a pleasant moment on that?
That's what we've talked about that on the show before. It's like, oh my God, it's an hour and 45 minutes to the burn.
Right.
But really, it just makes life harder for the traffic reporters. That's all it does when you change the name.
That's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be 1.5 hours at the burn.
You know, a long time ago in a former life, I was a press secretary for Forrest Claypool when he ran for a Cook County board president. And we were driving around one day, and I said to him, you know, the upside of losing this is that if you win and you're there for 20 years, they'll name an expressway after you. And everybody will be saying, oh, I was on the damn Claypool for 2 hours. But we digress. You know, I like the idea of the Navy Pier thing. I mean, she was really big on Navy Pier. Name the ballroom for her. What the heck? Can we do that? Can we do that, Kristen?
As long as it's cheap.
Yeah, but it's a plaque.
Little plaque.
Put a plaque up.
Yeah,
it doesn't cost anything. Yeah, well, I have to change it stationary for events there.
Right. And we can move her fountain into it.
Well, do you remember when they tried to name a street for Nelson Algren, which I think you would agree with?
Yeah.
Do you know that? You know that,
No,
right?
I don't know
Well,
that.
you know, back in the old days, Evergreen Street, I think, in Wicker Park, which is where he had a little apartment, And somebody came along and said, we need to name a street for Nelson Algren, which absolutely makes sense, right? And they couldn't do it because all the people who lived in Evergreen said, no, they'd have to change my stationery, and I have to get my driver's license changed. And so...
But see, then they came up with all those commemorative street names, which are so confusing to the tourists downtown. Hugh Hefner Way is actually Ohio Street.
Yeah, try to explain those people.
And
just
I
ignore
remember,
the brown ones.
I remember when they named Mies van der Rohe Street down in Streeterville because it was one block that had nothing on it, so there were no addresses. But anyway.
Well, it's minimalism.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's a perfect, yeah. Okay, can we change subjects?
Please.
Let's talk just briefly about this student code of conduct that was passed yesterday by the Chicago Public Schools. I mean, it's a very serious, very complex thing. We won't be able to give it the time and the attention it deserves. But why are they doing this? Why are they reducing the number of days that a student can be suspended or the offenses for which a student can be suspended? What's the issue?
I think CPS is very concerned about data. Dropout rates, graduation rates. A zero tolerance policy doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You cannot treat every case as a zero tolerance case because they all have nuances. They all have differences. You're dealing with kids. So I think it makes perfect sense. It's long overdue. And I think the idea is that they don't want to suspend and expel students at such a rapid fire pace because they want to get those graduation rates up. I mean, that's the big stigma of CPS, is that half of the kids who start out as freshmen don't graduate as seniors.
That sounds really cynical. So they're doing this not because they want to help the kids,
but
because they want to get their rates up.
No, I think they do want to help them. I think they want to help them. I think it's the right policy. I mean, they gave all kinds of national examples where CPS has been an outlier in this, in the way that they handle discipline.
I mean, in other words, it's an all good thing, because the reason you increase your graduation rates is because you save kids from being kicked into the street.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say.
I mean, this is what happens, I totally agree. This is something we really strongly push for, and it's great to see. Kids come out of dysfunctional backgrounds. They come from tough homes sometimes, and they go to school, and they're all messed up. And then they're not exactly, and then they're disruptive, and the school doesn't know what to do with them. And then the kid gets tossed out the door, and where do they go? They don't go home. It doesn't work there. They just hang out, and then they're gone. And then they're gone. And if you can find, in every study anyone's ever done has shown that, in fact, if you can keep those kids in school, you can give them the resources you need. And I know this sounds like social work jargon, but if you can give them a counselor who can sit and say, what's going on in your life? What's going on? And it really can be some basic things these kids don't have, like they didn't have, didn't have a decent meal or whatever. And if you can keep them, and they do get better, and they are more successful, and it's just much, much, much better. It's the way you treat, it's the way we should be. Now, one of the arguments against it is that in favor of people say, well, it's because it's driven by the fear that this is racially motivated, that a lot of the kids are black kids, disproportionate number of kids are minority. The argument in defense of that is that a lot of the kids are black and other minority, but they come from tougher neighborhoods, poorer income, So to dismiss this as some sort of racial thing, I think is besides the point.
Well, and
the real important point is that these kids should be, this is how you should deal with these kids as a school.
Conflict resolution, and we're kind of moving toward that as a society. And as far as the racial point, I mean, a lot of the administrators and teachers in CPS are black and minority. So I think that also kind of tempers that argument.
It does occur to me, though, that it would be really tough to be a principal who is being told, okay, now we're taking away this, maybe ineffective, but nevertheless, this tool that you have to control some of the rougher elements in your school. And oh, by the way, we're not going to give you anything in the way of the resources to try to put some kind of justice system into your school, or to bring counselors into your school or anything else. So it's just sort of like you're even further out there on your own.
Well, that's what we wrote 2 days ago. The biggest challenge here is that if you're going to do this, and it's absolutely the thing to do, then you have to try to make it work. And the way you make it work is you provide those resources in the school. When a school has a culture where no tolerance, it's very hard to change that culture just by having some bureaucrats at the top telling you this is what we do now.
We have a new culture as of today.
Yeah, you have to go into the school, you have to have more social workers and counselors, you have to have more training for the teachers and for others about here's how we're going to do things. There's a whole system you have to put in place, and frankly, Our concern is that that system's not there. They're not really putting any extra money into this, a little bit, not much. And so they're doing the right thing, but if it fails, people will blame the policy, and they shouldn't. It'll be the execution wasn't done right.
No, I was just going to add that I think they do still have some tools for kids who bring weapons to school, etc. But they're also letting up on, when you talk about the culture, a lot of these schools have full-time police forces and security, and so it's just a very, they bring in all of law enforcement when something relatively minor goes wrong. And so I think it's good that they are backing off of that.
And kids can get arrested when they're 8 years old, and, and we've seen all those kinds of stories. You know, there's so many things I want to go over with you in politics. I want to talk about Bruce Rauner. I want to talk about Pat Quinn. But we also talk about journalism on this show, and this is a chance to really talk about something that I think is just fascinating. You guys at the Tribune have just announced yesterday, I believe, right, that you're going to be expanding the op-ed pages in the Tribune to now 3 pages a day with more opinion, and I think that's fantastic, and I support and applaud that. And you guys aren't doing that because, for whatever reason, your resources may be limited. But the thing that has always fascinated me about the Sun-Times is that the Sun-Times is a great go-to place for opinion people. I mean, you got great columnists.
That's true.
And so, you know, the thing that I find myself doing more and more, and I'm sure I'm typical of everybody else, is that I'll get up in the morning and I'll scan through everything online. I pretty much am up to date with the news, you know, by 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And then later on in the day at lunch, maybe if I have a chance to sit down with one of the papers to actually read the Dead Tree edition, I want to look at the opinions. I want to look at editorials. I want to look at columnists. I want to look at op-ed. I want to see what people are saying about the news. And you know, don't let me go on and on here, but that's kind of what I'm thinking is the future for, at least for the printed version of the newspaper, and maybe even for the online.
I think so, because of a lot of the reasons you talked about. I mean, people are looking for more analysis now, because the news you're getting 24 hours a day. You want the analysis, and we are very fortunate that we have a publisher and an editor who really support the editorial page and like what we have to say, and we've tried to be kind of a bright light in the city. Same with the Sun-Times, great opinion leadership, and I think you're right, that's where readership is headed. So we hired another editorial board member, we moved somebody over from business, and we're expanding those commentary pages. And this is not just the voice of the Tribune. We get excellent op-eds from people, you know, that we never get a chance to run, that now will get a chance.
Yeah, I think I mean, what you're doing is great. I mean, I'd take more pages in a heartbeat if we can get it, and the people to do it. So you know, that's always, you always want more, and it's always good. And I really appreciate what you said, which is that when you're talking about opinion and commentary in the paper, it's not just the editorial page and those sections, it's the whole paper. And I do think you're right. I think when it comes to opinion, where we're really strong is in our upfront columnists, people like Mark Brown, people like Mary Mitchell, Carol Marine, Neil Steinberg. So we're strong there too, which is, so I'm glad you pointed that out. The only danger of this is, and I don't think it's going to happen to the Tribune. It's going to be, you know, with all respect, I think it'll be great stuff. So we live in a society where people don't want news anymore. They just want people to shoot off their mouth and reinforce their own biases.
That's the dark side.
I don't think that's going to happen with these guys, because they haven't done that before. They tend to have more thoughtful commentary, and that's the challenge. People, as we move into this era of increasing commentary, my fear is that what drives that is people who are not looking for objective news and objective information, but looking for things that reinforce their biases. Not with us, but I think as a general phenomenon in the country, and that's does concern me.
And one other thing I wanted to point out too about editorials, and again, having both of you is really a luxury to be able to talk about this, but the editorials 20 years ago really did reflect the view of the guy who owned the paper. And more we're seeing, I think in healthy newspapers, which I would put both yours in that category, the editorials are becoming more kind of an institutional look at things, but not necessarily, you know, I don't read, particularly when I read your stuff that you write in the Sun-Times, I don't think of this as being the view of the corporate structure that owns the Sun-Times. I think of it as being a kind of a
but in a way, Ken, it is.
of
in a way, it is. If I was writing things that were completely out of step with the people who own that paper and the publisher, I wouldn't be in this job. And that's happened in the history of the Sun-Times. When the Sun-Times decided to be more, they were sort of a more liberal voice, more progressive voice for years. And then when Murdoch and Bob Page and those folks came along, became very conservative and Rattler. And then Steve Huntley became the editorial page editor because he's more inclined that way. And then when the new ownership came along, they were more liberal, or at least they took a calculated view. We should get back to our roots. And that was John Cruikshank and Michael Cook running the show. And all of a sudden, Steve was out of step. So Steve stepped down, and they brought in other people.
I didn't know that he was editorial page editor. I never knew
Steve,
that.
oh, he was very good at it, too. He's terrific. And but he was more conservative. And so he actually moved aside because the paper and the people above him, the owners, had a different view of what the editorial page should be. And I live with that. And I think I live with that more as a reality than perhaps the Tribune does, because it's when you're more of a liberal paper or more progressive, there aren't a whole lot of real rich people who agree with you. So I'm always wondering how much we're in step.
That's not true. That is not true.
And one of my jobs, I think, as editorial page editor, as we've had new owners and new leaders, is to sort of explain that to them, that an institution has a voice, a consistent voice, and that you have to honor that.
Yeah.
And that every time you have a new set of owners, you can't just flip the world upside down.
Yeah.
There are a lot of wealthy, liberal, democratic
I'm
people
being
who
simplistic.
read your paper, and there are a lot of middle class,
right,
more conservative people who read ours as well.
Oh, I didn't mean it that way.
And I've said this before. I've said it in your presence. I think one of the real still problems that we have with Chicago newspapers is your paper's decision not to endorse candidates. I think it's a terrible. You don't have to respond. I think it's just a terrible decision. Do we have time? I guess we got a couple of minutes. We have time to talk about Bruce Rauner. We'll have to do it very briefly, but my impression of the Bruce Rauner campaign is that it has essentially just kind of fizzled on the launch pad. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but a crate full of chickens?
I know. That was a clown show press conference. It really was. I think he's fizzled in the sense that he doesn't get in front of the press corps very often, and I think he underestimates how well the press corps knows the state budget and the specific questions that they're going to ask him, and he's run his whole campaign on fiscal responsibility. So let's see it. Let's see your pension plan in writing. Let's see it with an actuarial analysis to see how much it's going to save. Yeah. What are you going to do about Medicaid? That's going to be a bigger problem in the coming years than pensions. So he's kind of rolling out these little ideas, but you know what they remind me of? Blagojevich. That's what he did when he first ran.
Cool.
Like,
that is so cool.
we're gonna pool our paper towel purchases and all these little items, and that does not add up to savings.
Well, what it told me was that these problems really are tough problems, and the idea that a bunch of politicians in Springfield don't know what you're doing, and if you just had a strong businessman come in, he could change the world. Well, the strong businessman has been asked to put up or shut up, and he can't do any better. And then what it really tells me is that the pain is going to be real when we finally do address these issues, because nobody can find a way around it, including the guy who says he's going to find another way. There is no other way.
Well, I did my tour of duty in government. I worked for the city of Chicago for 10 years or so, and we went through that whole thing of, nobody knows how to run government, but business people really do. Let's bring business people in and they'll fix it. And you bring the business people in and they just scratch their head and say, you mean I can't just fire everybody I want?
I hope he's just holding back because you put out specifics and then you get attacked on the specifics. Right. So I think he's probably trying to bring out substance, but I really hope there's a plan, and I think you will see.
You hope there's a plan.
You will see more pile-on between now and election day.
Do you think it'll make much difference that there isn't?
10 seconds.
I mean, one of my theories is that it really doesn't matter. People just want a different type of person running the government.
We're the only ones who will care. Yeah, you're right.
No.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Two great friends of the program. We have editorial page people here, Kristen McQueary from the Chicago Tribune and the editorial page editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, Tom McNamee. Thank you so much. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can watch us, you know that, right here on CAN TV. And of course, if you go to this little address right here, you can watch Chicago Newsroom any old time you want. And you can also subscribe to us on iTunes. And as we always say, we'll come out to your house and do the show in your backyard if that helps. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week for another show right here on CAN TV. Thanks. Bye.